Hey guys, so I have family staying here at my house and they're staying down in my Happy Lady office. So I'm back in the old office. As you can tell, things might look a little bit different. But today I am so excited to read to you chapter 3. I should also add that these characters are from England and the Isle of Man. So as you listen to me read the dialogue, hopefully you can imagine their native accents with these witty remarks. It makes it so much better. But of course, I'm not going to be doing those accents as I read, so you're going to get the Americanized version of the dialogue. But try to imagine it if you can. It makes it so much better. Some unexpected things happen in today's chapter that really take this story to a whole other level. Things are about to get crazy in all kinds of ways. This chapter actually always reminds me of a soap opera. And again, it's got some of that romance going on. It's very descriptive. Again, I've changed some of the wording. But we're about to go for a ride. You ready to join me? Chapter 3. Sarah stood back, examining the curtain she had hung across the front door pane of their newly rented adobe cottage. Humble it was, and small, like the others on the street, but sturdy and well-built by patient pioneer hands. Standing in the doorway facing north, she looked toward the growing city. Tiny rosebud in the desert, she thought, sheltered by towering mountains on the east and bordered by the mirror-like Salt Lake on the west. Brigham Young's famous words blended in her mind with the pioneer song third verse. Changing the first two words in the past tense, she sang, "We've found the place which God for us prepared. Hum, 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 to hurt or make afraid. There the saints will be blessed. Da 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 da. Dee 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 dee. Above the rest these words will tell, all is well, all is well." Smiling to herself, she stepped back into the room to view her work. "Mother'll like that. Nice place. After living 3 months in a covered wagon. Curtains do make such a difference." She tested its sliding ability on the waxed cord by pushing it to one side. Works nicely. Could do with a few more gathers, but there was no more material. It'd do. Have to. She fluffed it back into place with gentle jerks and twists. Her nimble fingers swept back and forth over the scanty gathers, dividing their fullness evenly across the top. "Wonder how it looks from the outside. Have a look." She stepped outside at the same time, glancing toward the street and the city. Someone, a man, was approaching. Must be, sure enough. It was Charles. She put her hand up to shade her eyes from the sun. The bright light dazzled her so that she could not see clearly. Why did he hesitate? He seemed in no particular hurry. In fact, he wasn't even looking in her direction. Didn't know she was watching him. Or did he? Was he merely loitering to annoy her? Obeying a sudden impulse, she called to him as he paused on the dirt sidewalk. "Are you lost? Or is this the place you seek?" Her voice startled him. He wasn't faking. Realizing her forwardness, she lowered her eyes in confusion, blushing furiously. The man looked up, saw a slight girlish figure framed in the doorway, a few paces ahead of him. Her head was bent forward as if weighed down by the huge braids that hung over her chest. Hesitating no longer, he moved toward her as though drawn by a magnet. The sun played for a second through the golden glint in her hair as she stepped aside to let him enter. Though he did not speak, she heard the quick intake of his breath as he paused briefly on the step. Still with downcast eyes, she said, "Please, come in." He stepped past her into the room. Her first sensation was one of relief that he had not seized her in his arms, there on the doorstep, where any passerby might see. As she shut the door, her hand brushed against him, sending a magnetic shock through both their bodies. She leaned for support against the closed door, trying to control her pounding pulse. He's changed, she thought. He doesn't pounce upon me as I feared he might. I like him much better this way. a little reserved, self-possessed. It's the way I've always wanted. She was glad the curtained window held out the light. Her cheeks felt flushed and hot. She drew a deep breath and expelled it slowly. He's waiting to see if I'll take the initiative. He's so sweet about it. She felt his eyes upon her, knew he was waiting. Her fingers relaxed their hold on the knob. She came to him closely, eyes downcast, for her boldness terrified her a little. He seemed to be waiting. She lifted her face and whispered, "Aren't you going to kiss me unless I ask you to?" She was in his arms. Never, so long as she lived, was she ever to forget the ecstasy of that moment. The gentleness, the tenderness of his embrace, as though afraid to come too near. She felt honored and uplifted. A sweet and happy thrill ran through her. His kiss was like his embrace, strong yet tender, with a compelling reverence such as he had never shown before. He raised his head and saw the rapid throbbing of the pulse in her throat. Her beauty swept him like a living flame. It was an intoxication of spirit and body. Again he kissed her, not madly, as she remembered on the plains, but with gentle fervency. Words he had read long ago sank in his heart, and they two were one flesh, and it was so. "I love you," she breathed. "Oh, Charles, I'll never love anyone else so long as I live. And God forgive me, I love you, Sarah." "What do you mean, God forgive you? I'm not Charles." "Not Charles? Then who?" She sprang from his arms in a blank dismay. "I am Will, Charles's brother." Her great frightened eyes searched his face. This could not be happening to her. She felt suddenly faint. The four walls of the room seemed to be closing in upon her. Her hands clung desperately to each other for support, while the muscles in her jaws flexed, then became rigid as iron beneath the smooth skin of her cheeks. The cold, empty fireplace gaped back at her blankly as she started past the man into its blackened depths. "This is a nightmare. I'll wake up in a minute. Everything will be all right. Charles will grab me to him in the old familiar way. But no, she knew it was true. It could not be Charles. She had sensed the difference the moment he touched her. He waited for her dismay to change to anger. Waited for the blistering words of insulted pride to burst upon him when she fully realized her mistake. Finally, she raised her eyes to his face. How tall he was! Charles to a T. From his brown eyes she saw pain, humility, and a great tenderness looking back at her. Under their pleading intensity, her own gaze fell. It was he who broke the silence. The low, deep quality of his voice sent a new wild thrill coursing through her being. "There is so much to be explained," he said. "When you spoke, I had no idea who you were for the first time. You mistook me for Charles. Believe me, I did not come here to deceive you. When I heard your voice and looked up, I knew only that you were the most beautiful creature I had ever seen. Your friendly greeting— Don't, please. I know, I have not the right. I spoke only because I thought you were Charles. I realize that now. You look exactly like him." "Perhaps because we chose the same parents," he smiled, and the tension between them slackened. The tightness about her mouth relaxed into a faint smile. He was quick to note her relief. He continued, "We do look alike. Ever since we were boys at home, we've been mistaken for twins. Even Mother got us mixed up now and then, at a distance." He was glad to see her regaining her composure. Remembering Charles, he added, "Didn't Charles ever tell you he had a stand-in?" Hesitating over the last words, "He mentioned you several times, but never explained about you looking alike." She was trying to rearrange her shattered thought patterns. There were two instead of one of them. They were exactly alike, yet totally different. She looked at his clothes. Brown buckskin jacket, riding breeches and high-topped boots, the same as Charles wore. He was bareheaded, his heavy auburn hair parted low on the left side and brushed back from his sun-tanned brow and temples. Charles combed his in the same fashion. Then she found the difference. It lay in the eyes, the mouth, and the chin. Charles's eyes were not filled with kindness, as were this man's. Charles's mouth and chin were weak, where Will's were strong and firm, or so they seemed to Sarah's eyes. For one brief moment, believing this man to be Charles, the color of her world had taken on a finer, richer hue. Then, like the tolling of a bell, those words, "And God forgive me, I love you, Sarah." It was though icy fingers had reached into her chest and squeezed the blood from her throbbing heart. Realizing they were both still standing, she said, "Won't you sit down, sir?" "I will, if you don't mind. There is no need of formality between us. Charles has told me of you so often." Without warning, the door opened, and Charles stepped into the room. Neither had heard his step nor his knock, if he had knocked. Catching sight of Will, he turned to close the door, as he exclaimed, "Well, here you are. I wondered where you'd gone. Come to look her over yourself, I see." Turning to Sarah, "Afraid I'd marry beneath my station," he grinned. Standing together, their likeness was striking, though Charles was a shade taller than Will, and a few pounds heavier perhaps. Only the most careful observer would have noticed it. Sarah stood rooted to the floor. Charles seemed utterly sure of himself, unaware of what had taken place a few moments before. He had been looking forward to this meeting during his 3-week absence from the city. Now he came toward her. "Aren't you going to welcome me?" Her lips parted, but no words came. He caught her to him, but she shrank back. "What?" he laughed. "No kiss for your future husband?" "No, Charles, wait." "Wait? Heck, I've waited over 3 weeks. That's long enough. Don't mind Will, he's one of the family. Can I pick him, brother, or would you still say I exaggerate?" Without waiting for an answer, he drew her close and kissed her hungrily, forcing her head back upon his arm, almost choking her. It was as if by doing so he would prove that she was his. Angrily, she wrenched herself free and slapped him full in the face. "You little devil! What's got into you?" he exclaimed. "Trying to show off for company? I tell you, Will isn't company. I've told him all about us. He knows I'm going to marry you. Now stop being uppity. Fine welcome you give a man. Don't misjudge her, Will. She doesn't like to let on, but she's really crazy about me. Aren't you, kitten?" Will walked to the window. The conflict within him was stifling. There was absolutely nothing he could do or say, though he somehow felt responsible for the whole situation. He knew that the course of their 3 lives hung in the balance. He drew a deep breath, but there seemed to be insufficient air in the room. "I must get out of here," he thought, and turned toward the door. Sarah's back was toward him. He was glad of that. He would not have to meet her eyes. Her reaction to Charles's caress had revealed the conflict in her own soul, even though Charles had put an entirely different interpretation on it. He did not know that only a few moments before, his welcome had been stolen by his brother. He must not be allowed to suspect anything. "It would be far better for all concerned if I get out, and let them iron things out between themselves." "I must be going," he said, trying to make his voice sound casual. "I know you two would like to be alone. See you both later." He closed the door on the last words and hastened down the path to the sidewalk. He did not hear Sarah's voice as she started toward the closed door. "No, don't go." Then, seeing she was too late, "Charles, he's gone." "Why not? He's seen you. That's what he came for. Now he can stop worrying. Being the oldest, he feels he should look after me." He grinned, but his voice was serious. Sarah found her way to the mantel and pretending to rearrange the doilies beneath the china cups. Try as she would, she could not feel at ease with Charles. Perhaps the fault was more hers than his, for he had at least not changed. It was Will. She may as well admit it. Those brief moments together had uprooted her heart, and it would not settle back calmly as before. Charles came close. Placing a hand on either elbow, he turned her around to face him. He brought his hands up in a slow caress until they reached her shoulders. The warmth of his fingers penetrated her thin sleeve as he drew her to him. "Oh, my darling," his lips were against her hair. "It's good to be with you again." She stood passive, neither resisting nor responding, refusing to look him in the eye. He slipped a hand beneath her chin, lifting her bowed head. His consuming brown eyes studied her delicate features. As always, the red gold tendrils of hair escaping to frame her face fascinated him. With the palm of his hand, he smoothed them back for the sheer joy of watching them curl back into place. "Alone at last," he breathed. "Now, may I kiss your Royal Highness?" Her struggles but served to increase his ardor. Finally, he lifted and carried her to the sofa. He sat down with her close beside him, his arm about her waist. "Where is everyone?" he asked. "Are you alone?" "Father left for California day before yesterday to work. Mother is helping Mrs. Moore with a quilt. She took Carrie with her." Her lack of enthusiasm irked him, though he ignored it. "Then we really are alone. How wonderful! We can make our plans now. Set the day, beautiful. Could you make it tomorrow?" "Charles! Say there'll be no more waiting." The words were like a caress, the voice vibrant as Will's. Again and again he drew the braids of her hair through his fingers. "Never have I seen hair more bewitching," he murmured, and the image of the chief flashed through her consciousness. A slight tremor rippled through her body as the memory and the sharp contrast flashed before her mind's eye. Something of them both seemed merged into one in this man beside her. A lump rose in her throat. She wanted to cry. She could find no words to give him. The events with the hour had changed her, yet he, unknowing, was unchanged. He became aware of her aloofness, ignored it, determined that nothing should come between them. They sat quietly for a time, he playing with her hair, she silent and remote, trying to readjust to the reality of the two brothers. Presently he said, "When will it be, Sarah? Won't you set the day?" "There are many things to be settled before we can think of marriage," she answered. "What things?" "You know I wouldn't marry without Father's consent. If he's gone to work in California, he'll be back not for months. Your mother can speak for him too. If she agrees, we could be married right away. And the church, have you changed your mind about that?" "What? Are you willing to become a Latter-day Saint?" "Me?" he laughed. "A saint? Why, all the rest of the church would apostatize if I disgraced it by applying for baptism." "But Charles, I promise I'll never interfere with your religion." "That is not enough. Don't try to make a religious fanatic out of me, Sarah. I couldn't be a saint even for you." "But you don't understand. There can be no halfway measures. It would be like a wall between us. I'd be on one side and you'd be on the other. There's nothing between us but your imagination. You're young. There'll be years of happiness for us together. Only if we believe in the same things." Suddenly he remembered the thing she most dreaded. He said deliberately, "If I join your church, they'll be urging me to take another wife in a year or so. Would you like that?" The shot went home. She jerked her hand from his, exclaiming angrily, "Why must you say things like that?" He laughed. "I like your reaction. It intrigues me. Even your hair gets redder." It was true. He derived a secret delight in rousing her anger, especially when she was slow to respond to his wooing. Drawing her close, he continued, "You're as intoxicating as old wine. I never wanted you more than when you slapped me. If you don't behave, I'll slap you again." She resented his attitude of ownership. "I like the way you fight back. Spunky little devil. I've never seen. And to think, you're a Mormon." He was speaking as much to himself as to her. She no longer pitied him. She'd do well to hold her own, she thought. But she caught him up. "You bet I am, and I intend to stay one." She was on her feet like a flash, facing him defiantly. "What's more, I'm going to marry a Mormon and raise a family of Mormons." He too rose. "Wait a minute," he began, trying to calm her, but she evaded his embrace. "I won't be bullied by you nor any other man into marrying outside of my church. I have never led you to expect such a thing, and you know it. If you can't change, neither can I." She wheeled and started toward the kitchen. He caught her by the arm. His face flushed, his eyes glowing with excitement. He exclaimed, "You're magnificent, honey. I'd like to take you to New York, where you could display that talent of yours to real advantage. You'd sweep 'em off their feet." "Stop it, Charles. I don't like being laughed at, and I meant every word I said. You don't say. I'll not marry you outside the church if I die an old maid. And I'll never join the dang church for any woman alive. It killed my mother. Do you know what? His voice broke. He steadied it and continued. They left her in an unmarked grave, back there somewhere on those wild plains. She believed with her whole heart, and see what it did to her? She'd be alive today if she'd never heard of Mormonism. They returned slowly to the couch and sat down. Now that she understood the reason for his sudden bitter outburst, her heart stirred with pity. She wanted to offer sympathy and comfort. She reached out her hand and placed it over his clenched fingers. I'm sorry, Charles. Now I shall never know your mother. It was the first voluntary caress she had given him. It sent a wild, sweet thrill through his heart. His own fingers relaxed and turned to receive hers in a firm, hard clasp. After a while, he carried her hand to his lips and kissed the palm. His lips felt hot to her cool flesh. You know how to give a man comfort, darling. You've got what it takes. Then resting his cheek on her shoulder, pleaded, Oh, Sarah, you've got to marry me. I'll do everything in my power to make you happy. I swear it. I can't, Charles, she answered gently. I don't expect you to become a Mormon if you don't believe as we do, but neither can I give up my faith for you. You won't have to give up anything. Believe as you like. I'll do the same. Neither will try to change the other. Our love is all we need. I want no other heaven than to have you. And no, you belong to me. But I do. I want to feel secure and safe for the hereafter as well as for this life. These barriers you bring up drive me mad. I never dreamed you could be so stubborn. Stop playing hard to get. A man doesn't mind fighting for the woman he loves, but the physical kind would suit me best, and I'd much rather fight for you than with you. Anyhow, it's your will against mine, and you haven't a chance, darling. I'll have you, if I have to fight every Mormon in Zion. There'll be no fighting, nor wedding either, as things now stand. As I see it, there could be no unity between us, nothing but contention, and I want none of it. Sarah, what are you saying? You've made it clear you want nothing to do with Mormonism. I hoped all along you'd come to believe as I do, that together we could build us a home here in Zion. But you make that impossible. They've been filling you with lies of what would happen to you if you married outside the church. The fear of losing her crept into his voice. Not one of those old gray beards wouldn't win you for himself if he could. Dang them! And you're nothing but a kid. But I know what I want. You want me. All I need to do is hold you in my arms. Not anymore. You'll never change, and neither will I. No religion is worth sacrifice. Ours is. I knew Joseph Smith. He was a man of God. The gospel he taught was and is true. I was only 7 when he was martyred, but I remember him as well as I do my own father. He came to our house almost daily. Often I sat on his knee. Once he said to me, Sarah, there's a wonderful future in store for you. You will live to see many great and marvelous things come to pass and be a mother in Israel. As she spoke, a feeling of helpless frustration took possession of him. He had felt so sure of her for weeks. Now he was not sure. Exercising self-control was a new and painful experience, but he dared not risk losing more ground. Mastering himself with an effort, he said, Let's not talk about it anymore, darling. What do you say? What I really came here for in the first place was to ask if you would go to the dance with me tomorrow night. I wondered if you'd ask me, or if we'd have to accept Uncle William's invitation. He was here this morning and asked if Mother and I would go with him and Aunt Louisa. He is Father's brother, you know. What did you tell him? That we'd let him know later. I thought, perhaps, you'd be back for the dance. Then it's settled. I'll bring Will along, and he can escort your mother. Phil can take Mary Alice. And that's it for Chapter 3. How did you feel about this chapter, this little turn in the story? You probably didn't see that coming. What do you hope will happen in the next chapter? Post your comments down below. I'd love to hear all about it. And I will see you next week for Chapter 4.